Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We have a special guest with us today and very exciting news. Cali Audio is joining the Sweetwater family. We've got Nate Baglyos, co-founder of the company, joining us. Great to see you, man.
Great to see you, man.
Thanks for coming in. We appreciate you taking time. I know you're here showing off the monitors to the sales engineers.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to be starting with Sweetwater.
Right. So you guys have kind of an interesting story. There have been a few companies lately, but yours is that have done this, and that's you kind of all left an established kind of company and started something new. Tell us a little bit about that. How does that happen, and why did you do it?
Yeah, so the reason why was that we thought that we would be able to make a better studio monitor for less money. And I think that this has proven out pretty well at this point. Right. The how of it is much more difficult. It is a very difficult consideration to make, to leave something that is secure and maybe a little bit comfortable and say, all right, striking out on my own, how are we going to do this?
Right.
And the key for us was making sure that we had a team that was going to be able to pull this off. And so there are the big obvious things, who's going to design the thing? How's it going to be engineered? Who's going to sell it? Who's going to talk about it?
Right.
But then there are the things that you don't think about quite as much, like who's going to make sure that the cabinet fits together the way that it needs to? And who's going to figure out where to buy the plastic and the magnets so that we're not getting charged an arm and a leg for that stuff? So sort of that key crucial part to start is finding the team, putting that team together. And then all of us have to have really careful conversations with our spouses about, look, I know this paycheck comes in every month, but this could be something really special. And getting our spouses on board, getting our families on board, and really saying, we want to do this. We think that we can make something that is going to make it easier for people to make better music and spend less money doing so. That's something the world deserves, and that's something that we want to spend our time doing.
All right, that's very cool. A very, very worthy goal, certainly. So you guys have been in action, if you will, for a little over a year, right?
That's right.
2018. And you've got two models that have been released, the LP6, the LP8. I know there's some other things that are on the way and that you're working on as well. We're very happy to have you here at Sweetwater. Interesting when you talk about making a better monitor for less money. Tell us about the characteristics that make this a better monitor.
Absolutely. So on the front of the speaker is sort of the easiest things to point to. The biggest thing is the waveguide that is around the tweeter. And the waveguide for the person who's buying the speaker is free. It's a shape in plastic. We can do any shape we want. The difference between this and some other things that are out there is just the amount of research and development that we do. And so the research and development for this waveguide makes sure that the sound is spreading out in an ideal manner. So what does that mean? So you're hearing, whenever you hear any speaker, you're hearing direct sound from the speaker.
Sure.
You're also hearing reflected sound from objects in the room. If that direct sound and that reflected sound don't match each other, your brain rejects the reflected sound. It says, that's not part of the signal, I'm not going to listen to that. And so you hear the two speakers, and that's fine. But if the reflected sound does match that direct sound, now your brain accepts all that stuff, and what that is stereo information. And you've heard this in a mix where you can hear, it's not just the two speakers, but you can hear things in the center. And on really good speakers, you have a sense of up and down, you have a sense of back to front, you can really place things in space.
Right.
That's what this shape does. And again, that shape is just a shape in plastic. Doesn't cost the person who buys this speaker 1 cent. So that's the sort of thing that we're able to do with some research and development that really makes these special. Some of the other things that I would point out, the woofer, we're using the largest magnet in this class. We're using the largest voice coil in this class. We spent more money on our woofer than people typically spend in a speaker in this price range. And we got that because the boxes that we use to ship the speakers in are not pretty. They don't look like anything. They don't need to look like anything.
Right.
You're going to recycle that thing. This is what you care about, is that woofer. And in doing that, we're able to deliver the same SPL, but with 6 dB lower distortion. So very clean, very clear, really nice, tight, punchy bass that doesn't compress, doesn't distort, doesn't take away from mid-range, doesn't take away from the high end.
Right.
And then the final thing that I'll point to, these are front-ported speakers. Again, at $149 each, these are going into a lot of people's bedrooms. These are going to smaller spaces. They're going to need to be shoved up against the wall.
Right.
And so if you don't have a front port, then you're losing a lot of what the port does in the first place. The issue with a front port is that port tubes tend to be a little noisy. So again, research and development. So what we were able to do on the front port, we ran airflow simulations for 4 days straight on an engineering laptop. That laptop is dead. Those poor fans finally gave up.
Right.
But we were able to determine a geometry which lets the airflow come through in such a way that it doesn't make noise out of the front port. So you have a ported speaker, you have something that is in the front, these can go right up against a wall without any problems, and it doesn't give you the drawback of most front ports where you have that kind of chuffing noise every time the bass hits.
Right, exactly. So there's some other interesting features in the monitors. There's a lot of shaping on the back panel. You've got dip switches back there that allow you to compensate for different things. Tell us a little bit about that and what that means for a user, having all that boundary control and the trim control.
Yeah, so on the back of the speaker, like you mentioned, we have all these options here. And what these are is exactly what you said. It's boundary control. So you put a speaker on a desk, and that desk is doing certain things to the sound. It's adding reflections. You put a speaker against a wall, like I mentioned, that wall is going to add reflections. You put a speaker on a console bridge in a recording studio, that console bridge is going to suck out 150 hertz. And so what we did is first we needed to determine, is this always true? Is this just walls that we have around, or is this every wall?
Right.
So we went to the Village Studios in Los Angeles. They have 5 or 6 large studios that are different shapes, different sizes. They've got different consoles in each studio. And we measured against every surface. We measured against different desks. We measured against different walls. We measured 6 different console bridges. And we were able to find every console bridge, not just the one we used, but every one sucks out 150 hertz. Every wall adds some of the same reflections. Every desk adds some of those same reflections. And so what these dip switches do is just take that out.
Okay.
So when you have the console bridge setting, we're just adding back in a little bit of 150 hertz. When you're on a desk, we're taking out a little bit of what the desk adds to the picture. And so what this means for you is that when you buy this speaker, you don't need to know how to EQ a room, or even that maybe you should need to EQ a room. You can just look at what's on the back of the speaker. You can say, that's me. You dial in the dip switch, and you're off to the races.
Right.
Just to be clear, this isn't, so it's not like each dip switch controls a different band of EQ. These are indexed EQs. So based on what you're telling the speaker, it'll pull a different EQ that we built, that we verified, and it'll load that in. And that'll be with the DSP for the speaker.
Right, so you're choosing a combination of the switches result in a certain shape on the bottom end, if you will, that corresponds to what you're seeing on these diagrams, which is a great way to present it. And those are all set it and forget it kind of things. It's not like you change those once you have the monitors in place, unless you move the monitors.
Absolutely, and if you do move the monitors, a lot of people are doing this on a mobile setting. They put a pair of these in an Uber, they go to their friend's house, and they help mix something.
Right.
You don't have to pull out the user's manual. It's just right there for you.
Right. Now you also have high frequency and low frequency trim on this. Given that you have the boundary controls, do you need to have those extra trim controls?
Yeah, so for some people it's just going to be a matter of taste. Some people don't like quite as much bass. We've aimed to make this a very accurate speaker, but we also recognize that people are used to certain sounds, and maybe that's the way they like to mix. So we wanted to allow that level of customization. And then there are going to be some places where, for whatever reason, those frequencies are going to be problematic. And in fact, I was just in a space that for whatever reason was just sucking out everything above 10K. And the speakers just sounded dull and lifeless. And so we just switched that switch up and added a little bit of high frequency and brought some life back into the speakers.
Right. Simple and easy to do. You've also provided RCA at -10 as well as 2 different formats for +4. The RCA is actually switched on the last dip switch. What is the point of that? Why do you turn that on and off?
So an open RCA, if it doesn't have anything plugged into it, is a radio antenna.
Okay.
And so that was the easiest way to get around that. So if something's plugged into it, it won't act as a radio antenna, but if it is open, you just turn it off to make sure that it's not picking up radio noise.
Nice, that's the first time I've seen that on a monitor. Even, many of them have RCA connections or whatever. I've never seen the on-off switch before, so that's very considerate of you to think of that. So there's some other specs and things about these monitors that are very interesting that I haven't seen touted as much as you guys are talking about them. The interesting one to me was the maximum listening distance, and how the LP6 is set up for 2.2 meters and the LP8 is set up for 2.8 meters. And that's to achieve 85 dB. Now, first of all, what is it about those listening distances? And second, what is it about 85 dB that's important?
So 85 dB is the threshold that is not risky. So if you're listening at 85 dB over a long period of time, you probably aren't going to damage your hearing. So that's sort of a good reference point to say, look, you can mix at 85 dB, that's fine. We also added in 20 dB of dynamic range on top of that 85 dB spec. So for, when the bass drum hits, or if you're mixing something like film and there's explosions and effects and that sort of thing, you're still getting those, and you're not getting into the limiter with a 20 dB peak.
Right.
The listening distance is just a function of just the way sound works, and just wanting to say, some people talk about speakers being near field or midfield. Some people really tout the max SPL measurement. On a studio monitor, the max SPL measurement is, we have a max SPL measurement. It's 112 dB on this. That doesn't tell you much. What tells you a little bit more is within this listening distance, which we define, you're going to be able to mix on these all day at 85 dB with momentary loud noises in your mix. You're not going to hurt your ears, and you're not going to get into the limiters of the speakers.
Right.
When you do get into the limiters of the speakers is when distortion starts to get audible. And that's by design. We wanted to make sure if the speakers are distorting, turn them down. You're not going to hurt them. The limiter is a hard limiter. It keeps any voltage that would damage the speaker from getting through to either of the drivers. But it does just mean, look, you're beyond the volume capabilities of the system. Turn it down, get a little closer.
Right. 85 dB is actually surprisingly loud.
Yeah.
When you sit down and listen to it, it's not like that you're whisper quiet or whatever. So how does somebody achieve that? Do you recommend that someone goes in with 1 kilohertz tone or white noise and a meter, or how do they calibrate their system to be 85 dB?
Calibration is a wonderful thing to do, and especially if you're mixing, and if you're doing it as a career, you should know how loud you're mixing. Right. And you should take steps to make sure that it is at a level that isn't going to hurt you. There are calibrators that you guys sell that you can do a 1 kilohertz tone, and you can know exactly how loud that these will be for you. If you're trying to figure out how loud they are in terms of that continuous, then absolutely just blast pink noise through them. Measure that from a measurement mic that's been calibrated, and that'll tell you about where your levels are sitting.
Right. That's important information to know how to set those up and to calibrate all those kind of things. So you can repeat the levels because the sound changes. Fletcher-Munson curve changes things as you turn up and down, and of course you can also risk your hearing health as well.
Right.
Doing that. Another interesting spec that you guys talk about is the amount of distortion in the speakers, and how with the low amount of distortion you have, that increases the clarity. Talk about that relationship of distortion versus the clarity in the monitors.
Yeah, so the real challenge in any studio monitor system is how do we get the most out of the woofer before you start to introduce distortion.
Right.
And distortion, in very simple terms, means that the woofer cannot keep up with the signal, or the amplifier, or something else. But if we're talking about it in practical terms, the woofer is the thing that's going to give up first.
Okay.
And so to keep distortion low, you need to make sure that enough power is going to the woofer, and you need to make sure that the woofer can handle the power that's getting to it. When you start to hear that distortion, you kind of know what really bad distortion sounds like, and it's that easy. The signal just sounds fuzzy.
Right.
What sounds a little bit different is when the speaker is just barely starting to distort. And that's when you lose that clarity on the low end. The bass doesn't sound as punchy, the kick drum doesn't sound as punchy. If you have really strong low end and then a vocal riding on top of it, the vocals can sound a little garbled or not totally clear. And a very low distortion system, what you're going to hear is all of the instruments, especially on the low end, are going to be nicely separated from each other. It's not going to be this sort of muddy mess on the low end. And every instrument that's riding on top of that, the guitars, the keyboard, the vocal, the other drums that are in the mix, are also going to be clear. You're going to be able to pull those out of the mix and listen to each of them clearly. And that's really something that is special about what we've achieved here. At this price point, to have a system that can allow you to hear that whole mix tip to tail and not have anything sort of get lost in order to get more low end out of it or to get more volume out of it, that's something really special.
Right. So I guess the most important question I have for you, and something I've been really trying to listen and hear the difference, is what is the sonic signature of the white one versus the black one?
Well, the white one's a lot lighter, obviously. So if you're using, if you're like an Apple guy, you're going to want the white one, obviously.
Right. Well, these are amazing speakers. I mean, the LP6, 6.5-inch woofer, 40 watts on top, 40 watts on the bottom. You've also got the LP8 with an 8-inch driver on the bottom, and that has 60 watts driving the woofer. So that gives you a little bit more low-end extension, right?
Yeah, so you have three things that you can choose from. When you add more woofer and when you add more power, you can get more output from the system. you can get more low end, and you can get less distortion.
Okay.
And usually you kind of pick one at the expense of the other two. So we picked lower distortion. Going from the LP6 to the LP8 is a little bit different from some other speakers where it's a bigger speaker, there's more low end, it plays a lot louder. The LP6 does play, or the LP8 does play a little bit lower than the LP6. It does play a tiny bit louder than the LP6. But the real difference that you're going to hear is that clarity below 200 hertz. And what's really something that struck me about it, hearing that for the first time, that clarity below 200 hertz opens everything up, all the way to 20K. The entire system just has more room to breathe. So it's doing a little less work, and you can hear that. And again, when we talk about that clarity, when we talk about being able to pick things out of the mix and hear everything individually, the LP6 does that really well. The LP8 does that a lot better. And so for people who are looking to choose between the two, if you have the space and the budget for the LP8, that's the speaker that I would recommend.
Right. It's a little different than some other manufacturers where you go from one size to another size and the whole sound of the speaker changes. The mid-range may change or the bottom extension changes pretty dramatically. These are pretty consistent. It still sounds like the Cali Audio monitor. It still has that characteristic.
And that's exactly what we're aiming for. We're aiming for an accurate, neutral speaker. There's a couple really good things that happen when your speaker is accurate. The biggest thing is that when you take it anywhere else, you play it on your car system, you play it over headphones, you play it on a Bluetooth speaker, PA speakers, whatever it is. If you mixed it on an accurate speaker, it's going to translate as best as possible to as many other systems as possible.
Right.
If you take every speaker that's ever been made and you average them all together, they more or less average to accurate. And so that's really what you want to be mixing on. That's how you can know, all right, if it sounds good here, it's going to sound good wherever else I put it. Right. The other thing about accurate sound is accurate sound happens to be very pleasing. So if you took all of us who are in the room right now and you played these speakers versus a less accurate speaker, and everything else was equal, it's the same distortion, it's the same waveguide, everything else, all of us would pick the more accurate speaker. And that's not that we're trained musicians either. Everyone in the world does this. You like to hear accurate sound.
Right.
And so these are pleasing to listen to. They're pleasing to listen to over long periods of time. And again, when you take that mix and ship it and somebody else is listening on speakers that aren't these, it's going to sound the way it should.
Right. Right. Very exciting that you guys have been able to deliver all that quality at the price point, and really the size of the monitor even that you're dealing with here. Congratulations on that. It's very
Thanks
cool.
so much,
very
man.
Cool. Obviously a result of the probably must be decades of experience that you guys have all brought together into the company.
Decades of experience, and all of our spouses sort of in our corner saying, "You better get this right."
Got to have that backup, right?
Yeah.
Right. Hey, thanks so much for coming in. We appreciate you stopping by and sharing what you know about these monitors. They're really, really incredible. Highly recommend that you check these out. Great addition to your studio. They're going to really up the quality of what you can do. Great to see you.
Thanks so much for your time,
Thanks
Mitch.
so much. And thank you for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.